I want to welcome you this morning. My name is Brian White. I am so glad you're here this morning. An absolutely beautiful day, right? Yeah. I was happy about that. We're in a sermon series right now on the I am statements from the Gospel of John, and there's 7 times in the Gospel of John where Jesus does the most interesting thing. He pairs the name for God in Hebrew, which is Yahweh, which is the verb to be, with a different kind of symbol from the Old Testament. And he's doing this to really help people understand, describing who he is and what he's doing. And so they're deep theological statements, and it's been fun to go through them. I am the good shepherd. I am the bread of life. I am the resurrection and the life. I am the life, the truth, or the truth and the way, the truth and the life. I'm the gate for the sheep. I am the light of the world, and today we're going to look at I am the true vine. From John, I'm going to look at the first 12 verses of the 15th chapter of John. I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine grower. He removes every branch in me that bears no fruit. Every branch that bears fruit, he prunes to make it bear more fruit. You have already been cleansed by the word that I have spoken to you. Abide in me as I abide in you. Just as a branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. I am the vine. You are the branches. Those who abide in me and I in them bear much fruit, because apart from me you can do nothing. Whoever does not abide in me is thrown away like a branch and withers. Such branches are gathered, thrown into the fire, and burned. If you abide in me, and my words abide in you, ask for whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. My Father is glorified by this, that you bear much fruit and become my disciples. As the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Abide in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. I have said these things to you so that my joy may be in you, and your joy may be complete. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. And he kind of goes on this, and this whole section, I think it's good to get our bearings, is really kind of a commentary on something that he said in chapter 13, and I don't want to lose that. I give you a new commandment, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you should also love one another. By this, everyone will know that you're my disciples, if you have love for one another. Loving one another, he's saying here, is the fruit that Jesus' disciples are supposed to bear. You know, the very first words that God spoke to humans in the first chapter of Genesis is to go and bear fruit. And that command is found throughout the entire Bible, over and over and over again. God created humans with an expectation that we would bear fruit. Now, there's a partner theme that runs throughout the Old and New Testaments with bearing fruit, and it has to do with vines, vineyards, and wine. Do you know there's over 300 passages in the Bible about vines, vineyards, and wine? And usually they're used as examples of how we bear fruit. Now, here in the Tri-Cities and around the region, we live in wine country. But I found, unless we work in the industry, most of us really don't understand what Jesus is talking about on some level in these passages. And not like the people of his day when everybody had their own, personal little vineyard, or they knew someone who had one and they would help them and work them together. A couple years ago, we had a really fun series, it was fun for me at least, on vines, vineyards, and wine, and it was called Bear Fruit. And Trevor Hollenbeck, our IT guru, everybody say, hi, Trevor. He's at home with COVID, so just, hi, Trevor. He really came through yesterday, and we'll see why in a minute. But he and I went to some local vineyards and some local wineries, and we interviewed people in the congregation who are in the industry, and they're professionals. And I want to dust off a couple of those interviews this morning, just a couple of them, to help us understand this passage. It was fun for me this last week to go back and watch those. Jesus talks in this passage about the importance of pruning. And I asked Pat Tucker from Water from Wine if he would talk about vines and pruning. And Water from Wine is a very unique winery. All of the proceeds, 100% of the proceeds, is a nonprofit. All of the proceeds go to water systems throughout the world, and they underwrite all of our work with water systems in Honduras, but they just go all over the place. That winery is very, very near and dear to my heart. We have a partnership as a church with the winery, and it actually happens to be housed on the farm that we live on as well. And so I want to introduce you to Pat, and he has some real good wisdom for us.
So what we have here is a Cabernet Sauvignon grapevine. It's planted about 18 inches deep. This is the trunk. There's actually two trunks here. We take the best two shoots off of what we plant, and we train them up onto cordon wire. And this is a cordon. It's a real. It's just like the other shoots, but it becomes. We leave it over time, and it grows quite big. It's about almost 3 inches in diameter right now, and this is the drip line irrigation. We can talk about that later. But we've got the trunk, the cordon, and then these are shoots. All these vines. Right now we have them tucked into a wire here, so they're going up. It's a vertical shoot layout to where we try to get all the shoots going up, so we can have the sunlight come in. The sunlight on this side gets in because we take all the leaves off, so the sun can get through, but the sun's traveling that direction. So on this side, we leave some of the leaves in place. But after harvest in the spring, we'll come in and we'll essentially cut off all the shoots, cut off every one of them, leaving one every 12 inches or so on the cordon, and then that shoot becomes the next year's fruit. The fruit is ready to harvest. We're going to harvest tomorrow, in fact. The clusters are really nice right now. There's no dehydration. They're about 25 bricks, which means 25% sugar, and that's what, after fermentation, the sugar turns to alcohol, and that's what creates the alcohol. But we're after smaller berries, and so we actually deprive the plants of water at certain times of the year to get less of a canopy. This creates the canopy up here. We get less of a canopy and fewer clusters and smaller clusters. We like a small cluster with small berries, because the ratio of flesh to skin on a berry, the skin is where you'll get the flavors for your product.
So the goal of pruning is that the plant will bear less fruit. I think this is really profound. But much, much, much better fruit. Without pruning, vines, they just kind of become a tangled web with very, very low quality fruit. But after they've been pruned, they're so much more productive, and that means better fruit. So pruning helps these vines become what they're capable of becoming. You wouldn't ever know what they're capable of producing unless they've been pruned. I just think that's fascinating. And Jesus is saying here that we need the pruner's knife to become what God has created us to be. Without pruning, we're just a tangled mess. We're never going to experience our potential. What we can be will never be realized. Even the disciples, and he's talking to the disciples in this point in the Gospel of John, they need pruning. They had been bearing fruit, but their pruning wasn't over. And I think this is so profound, because once a vine bears fruit, it still needs pruning so it can bear fruit in the next season. So Jesus is saying this is a description of how the relationships between God, Jesus, his followers are supposed to interrelate. God the Father is the vine grower. Jesus is the true vine, and we are the branches. But it's not just about relationship. There's a purpose for a vineyard, and what is that? That is to bear fruit. That's the ultimate goal. We are his people. He works through us. That's bearing fruit. But to do that most effectively, to do what we're created to be, we got to have some pruning, every single one of us, right? So pruning is not a one-and-done thing. It's something that's a continual cyclical life experience. Once we bear fruit, we still need pruning for the next season. So Jesus says, the branches that don't produce, they just kind of wither and die, and then they're only good for the fire. But those that are in the vine, they live and they bear fruit. Even when they go through some pruning, they continue to bear fruit. Pruning knife can be very painful. But a vine is never closer to the vine dresser than when it's being pruned. I think it's something we need to keep in mind. Pruning is a very intimate experience that happens for long-term health and for productivity. If you want a vineyard to produce optimal grapes, the vine dresser has to prune. But that's not all. You have to deal with the environment of the vineyard as well. What does that mean? To really understand the importance and the impact of environment on fruit, we traveled up to the very, very top of Red Mountain. And you all know Red Mountain just produces great grapes for wine. And we visited my friend Ryan Johnson up on the very cap of Red Mountain at Weather Eye Vineyards. So I want to introduce you, or actually we have some it's right at the top up there. You can see the environment is just amazing. It's Weather Eye ranges from 950 feet to 1,410 feet in elevation. And that is so much higher than any of the local vineyards, not even most of. That elevation, it brings a host of factors, and this is intentional, that come together, creating a very, very unique environment to grow grapes in. And I want us to go up to that ridge line and have Ryan take us on a little bit of tour on Weather Eye.
I left my former career as a vineyard manager in 2014 and started a consulting business. This project was actually one of my first clients, and I had it was a real blessing to walk onto this project with a really cool geologist. And for the next 6 months, we studied soil test pits, and I walked the site and I studied shade and wind and native vegetation and just all the clues that a site can give you. And it's kind of like being a detective in a way. And you could kind of say, well, why is this changing right here? What's making this grow differently in terms of the native vegetation? And could that apply to growing grapes? And what would that look like? And so for the 6 months of being a consultant, I was able to hike around the site and just really study it. And then at the end of those 6 months, I handed in the vineyard report. At that point, I was offered a job as manager for this, and I just had to take it. And this is, for me, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I've spent my entire career on Red Mountain, and this is my 22nd vintage here. And so it's kind of symbolic then to go from down below to on top of the mountain. And all its fun aspects, but then also its challenges and struggles. So I think it's one of those things for me, always trying to push myself and understand viticulture better. this is it. This is a fantastic opportunity.
So I want you to hear what Ryan started out with to really understand how they built Weather Eye from the ground up.
Well, you can imagine, and I've got some pictures of this place. It's you can almost look at the Horse Heaven Hills over there, and you see it's just barren, pretty hostile, cheatgrass, some scabby brush like rabbit brush, and then some decent sagebrush. But overall, you know, this is one of those just natural places where people thought it's not conducive to growing wine grapes because, well, number one, you don't have any water up here. Number two, it's too windy and it's too rocky. The soils aren't very good. And there's not a lot of protection for the vine, so, you know, it's pretty much impossible. But what we've determined over time, really what was lacking in all those things was the lack of imagination. And sitting back up here and getting to study the site and just get to dream a little bit, it's funny how these little bits and pieces started to come into focus. And the next thing you know, I think we've got maybe around 52 blocks on 32 planted acres.
Now, to really understand the environmental impact on grapes, we need a French term, and that's terroir. Terroir. And it refers to how the unique characteristics of a vineyard come together and they mix with all together for a very unique experience. Things like the soil, things like the topography, things like the climate, sunlight, but so much more. And I listened to Ryan talking about the terroir up on the top of the mountain.
We learned what that term meant only in about 2001, because it's not really, you know, that really is a French philosophy of how these wines express a place. And if you look at the mentality and the mindset, so many farms here, the history has been, whether it's orchards or row crops, you know, who cares if a carrot tastes like it's from the Horse Heaven Hills versus some other place in the Yakima Valley. Here, as we started to meet with geologists and even people from France would come over because they were interested in Red Mountain grapes. And we start to broaden our culture and our understanding, and we realize, you know what? That vineyard over there, 2 miles from this vineyard, it's all on Red Mountain. Those grapes are consistently different, even though it's just a couple miles away. The soils are slightly different. Now, let's back up. Mostly on Red Mountain, there's about 3 different soil types. But it's pretty heterogeneous. So what I learned at my old job was you could walk 50 feet and the soils change. And so it might go from a sandy loam, really deep, maybe, you know, 30 feet deep, to a silt loam or a sandy loam over cemented flood cobble. So, you know, the grapes will perform differently based on these soil changes. And that right there is the very heart of terroir. So you incorporate the soils, the sun, the wind, all the topography, the aspect, but maybe what we tend to forget, very important aspect is the human element, right? So it's the farmer's hands, it's the workers, and that truly is a piece of the terroir equation. And so, you know, if you had neighboring vineyards with the same soil types, you still might have a different result just based on that human input. But really, breaking it down, boiling it down, it's a sense of place.
So there's quite a few vineyards on Red Mountain, and the terroir on the top of the mountain is so different from the vineyards down low. And Ryan had to deal with a very unique environment up there if he was going to bear fruit. And I think this is really interesting.
I think for starters, if it's breezy down below, it's really windy up here. And so we have to account for that. And here we are, we're riding along the ridgeline of Red Mountain, and you can see there's not a lot of soil. The grass is pretty stunted. There's not a lot of big sagebrush or anything. But then on either side, particularly the leeward side, the soils deepen quite a bit. And so that's where you see where these vineyard blocks begin, is when we have a little more soil depth, but also that wind tends to finally roll over the top and we have a little more protection.
Okay, I want to stop at a block called La Mesita and really highlight some of the factors that come together to make weatherized terroir unique.
Well, one of the benefits to getting to spend a lot of time on site before we have to make planting decisions is parsing out those little areas, those little islands where you could maybe plant, maybe do something really special. And when I came off the ridge line and started to come down into this little bench that we call a mesita, the soil changed. So you can imagine, you know, maybe an inch or a half inch of cover over basalt and some really poor cheatgrass. All of a sudden it got a little spongy. And as I explored this area, you could really tell that this face acted as a windbreak. And over many years, the soil dropped out in a windstorm and built this up a bit, and things would grow and die and grow and die. And so the soil in this particular block is 2.5, 3 feet at its deepest, but really ideal for planting this variety Grenache, which can handle a little bit of stress, some heat, some poor soils, the wind. And we've employed a certain training system that we've developed over here. I call it a Christmas tree. But you can see that each vine is trained up to a short stake. It protects the fruit underneath it, keeps the branches from whipping against each other, and it gives that really important shade from row to row. And we've planted them really closely because, you know, we are on the south side of the hill. So there's a lot of exposure here. But this goes back to that concept of terroir, where how do you determine where the boundaries of this block should be? Well, this is kind of a no-brainer. This is one of those visual clues that it's pretty clear to me. Sagebrush, growing really healthy, big, bushy, strong. Sagebrush, it's struggling a bit, right? So you can imagine the wind and the lack of soil and the rocks and the heat. And that's true for this entire face. Everything is really scraggly and stunted. But again, when you get into a little protection, things tend to thrive in ways that you didn't expect.
Now, God really spoke to me on 1 acre block, and I want to share this part. Just really is fascinating. Ryan calls it the mountain monster, and we want to stop here for a minute.
Well, guys, welcome to Mountain Monster. This is what we call this particular block. It's just shy of 1 acre, literally on top of Red Mountain. It's a grape variety called Mourvèdre, which is a bit finicky. And so the concept here really is, if someone says an area is impossible to plant and farm, and we decided that we should try to prove that it might be, how would we go about? Well, guys, welcome to Mountain Monster. This is what we call this particular block. It's just shy of 1 acre, literally on top of Red Mountain. It's a grape variety called Mourvèdre, which is a bit finicky. And so the concept here really is, if someone says an area is impossible to plant and farm, and we decided that we should try to prove that it might be, how would we go about growing grapes on top of a mountain where there's no soil, it's too hot, it's too windy? And actually a moment of inspiration hit. I was looking at a soil test pit. So basically a hole in the ground, and when you dig a hole, you have to put the rubble somewhere. And it so happens that I kind of looked in that hole and I looked at the rubble and thought, you know what, that's kind of a nice little natural windbreak. And so that idea started to germinate. And I also started researching the vineyards of the Canary Islands. In the Canary Islands, it's really hostile. And so what they'll do is there'll be a little hole, and at the bottom of that will be a plant, and then they'll surround that with a rock wall. If you were to Google Canary Islands vineyards, you'll see really cool pictures of that. But the problem up here on top of Red Mountain is that we have spring and fall frosts. And so if we dug a little hole to protect the vine, that cold air would settle in there, and then we'd kill the plant or keep, killing those buds. It's kind of a no-win situation. Well, then the idea came, well, geez, let's say we dug out that hole and got the windbreak. What if we took clean dirt and then filled that hole and put a vine there? It became a potted plant. And we did a few trials where on a windy day, you could see that, everything above the windbreak was kind of shaking around, but then down below, it was pretty calm. And so we went for it. So out of the, shy of an acre, we've got 253 vines here. We killed off 3 of them. And it is totally not financially viable to do this. But the things that we're learning and even the marketing boost that we get from kind of doing these innovative ideas have been super worth it. This has given us the education to tweak this concept and even do more, because now, if you look around, really there's no soil here. If we can take this concept and apply it to some of the other areas on top, we can develop more acreage and more variety. So this Morved, as I mentioned, is really sensitive to stress. And it does get beat up here a bit, but I'll tell you, the wines from this place are singular. And they have a certain character to them that's really could be nowhere else. And so, here you go. Mountain Monster is proving its worth.
Like I said, we had, I think it was about a 6-week series, and there were so many great videos. I'd love to show them all. But so Ryan is a viticulturist. He grows grapes. I know Ryan. He's a friend. He's actually in our advanced karate class. He's a black belt too. Growing grapes is not just his job. It's passion. And if you spend any time with him, it's so obvious. He wasn't going to let something like a hostile environment stand in his way to bear fruit. So was it easy to find good soil to bear fruit up there? No, not at all. But Ryan put in the work, and he found those oasis patches of soil, and then he became very creative, because he had a job to do, and that was to grow grapes. Regardless of his environment, he was going to grow grapes where he was. He was going to find a way to make better fruit. What I really think is fascinating up on Red Mountain is the fruit is better not in spite of all of the stresses, but because of all the stresses that the fruit have up on top of Red Mountain. The stressful environment up on top of Red Mountain create better tasting fruit. Harsh terroir creates better fruit. Our job is to bear fruit, regardless of our environment. Even in the midst of a really, really hostile environment, Jesus says his disciples are to bear fruit, right smack in the midst of where they are. Our job bearing fruit is what? Loving one another. When Ryan drove me around Red Mountain that first time, and he told me the story of whether I just thought automatically of Jesus' parable of the sower and the different soils. Jesus said a sower went out to sow his seed, and as he sowed, some fell on the path that was trampled on, and the birds of the air ate it all up. Some fell on the rock, and as it grew up, it withered for lack of moisture. Some fell among the thorns. Thorns grew, and with it choked. Some fell into the good soil, and when it grew, it produced 100-fold. Sometimes good soil is hard to find, but it's out there. And if you want to be good soil, you got to find good soil. Good fruit starts with terroir. It starts with the environment. What do you spend your time doing? If you spend your entire day on social media, or looking at porn or any number of things, that is your terroir that you're managing. It's like trying to bear fruit in rocky soil. How's that going to work? Who are your influences? You know, parents, you get this. You know, your kids, they start modeling the other kids that they're spending time with. Well, the same thing goes for adults as well, and we know that. That's terroir. Are you surrounding yourself with people who are bearing the fruit of the Spirit? Paul says the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Spend some time watching the news. Ask yourself, and you know, if you're married, ask your spouse, am I bearing the fruit of the Spirit? Are your influences, the people around you, bearing the fruit of the Spirit? The people you spend time with, things you're spending time doing, the talk shows you're listening to, are they about these things? Is it good fruit or is it rotten? You know, we have a lot of choices in terroir. We know, like I said, the TV shows and the movies that our kids watch, they affect their behavior, but it's the same for us, right? Think about the environment of the world right now. The hurts and the suffering in the world and the anger and the division in our world. That is our terroir. Or at least part of it. But I'll tell you what, the church is your terroir as well. We're called to be one of those oasis blocks with deep soil in the midst of red mountains, surrounded by bare rock and shallow soil. That's a great picture of the church. And think about that. You know, God has called us to be the church right now with all the stuff that's going on in the world. And I think what an amazing vote of confidence that God has placed in us. We need to bear fruit. And it starts with our ground, our soil. Later, Jesus' disciples, they asked him about the parable, and Jesus explained it. Now, the parable is this. He says, the seed is the word of God. The ones on the path are those who have heard. Then the devil comes and takes away the word from their hearts so that they may not believe and be saved. The ones on the rock are those who, when they hear the word, they receive it with joy. These have no root. They believe only for a while in a time of testing, and they fall away. As for what fell among the thorns, those are the ones who hear, but as they go on their way, they're choked by the cares and the riches and the pleasures of life, and their fruit does not mature. But for those in the good soil, those are the ones who, when they hear the word, they hold it fast, an honest and good heart, and they bear fruit with patient endurance. Now, on the surface, it sounds like we don't really have much say into what soil we get handed. But I think there's so much more to it than that. You know, God is greater than any shallow soil, any thorns, any rocks. One of the greatest lessons, you know, Ryan taught me up on top of Red Mountain is harsh factors create better fruit in the hands of a good vine grower. Our job is to bear fruit, regardless of the terroir, regardless of the environment. You bloom where you're planted. You don't wait to be transplanted. Maybe you have to bring in some dirt. You know, maybe you have to pile up some rocks so the wind doesn't get you. You know, that's the spiritual disciplines. It's prayer, Bible study, small groups, worship. And there's a long list of that stuff. And the point is, you can say no to those things. Or you can cultivate those things in your life. That's when you bear fruit. We all have rubble, right? Let God redeem the thorns in your life. You know, that is the message of the cross, right? From the cross to the grave to the resurrection, that God can take anything that was meant for evil and bend it and force it into good and create new life and use it for his purposes. But we have to let the hand of the vine grower guide our lives. We have to stop trying to do it ourselves. Because God can take your circumstances that look like an impossible, just tangle web of vines, or maybe it looks closer to the tomb, and God can bring new life that you never imagined. And when that happens, you realize God has made you into an oasis for others in the midst of a desert as more and more you bear fruit.